All right, Mark, welcome to the Golf Coach Podcast, mate. How you going?
Very good. Thank you, Toby. And it's a pleasure to speak with you today. So thank you so much for the invitation. And it's very kind.
Mate, us and the listeners are incredibly lucky and grateful to have such an insightful person in the golf world like yourself on the podcast. And I actually would just enjoy the conversation we had earlier than as much as I would talking about golf or talking a little bit about health. And Mark and I share some very similar, I guess, thoughts around certain things in our lives. And I like that. People listening to this know them a little bit away from the norm with that, Mark. So I look forward to hopefully meeting you, in real and talking about that type of stuff as well, away from a golf podcast. But Mark, I've got you on here. People have seen the headline, and most people who are listening to this, I'm sure, have a very, very good understanding of who you are. What I want to know is what I wanted to do is just lay a bit of a foundation down to kind of let the listeners know and myself learn a little bit about who you are and what's your background and how have you kind of gotten to where you are now in the golf space?
I guess I've always been a little bit like our discussion off camera there. So I've always been really intrigued by all things kind of movement, performance, why we move the way we do, why we learn the way we do, how we've evolved. We could argue how we've devolved now in recent years. We're going through that kind of phase of devolution, unfortunately, but that's a whole different discussion. And but really, since I was really... if I think back, I have a very old mind now, unfortunately, Toby. If I go back, say, 40 years ago now, when I first started to kind of play golf, I was always very curious as to, I wonder why we do this, and very exploratory as a child, for example. I loved to play and try, and I'd listen to people, and very organic in that way. And I was always very curious to, around, anatomy, physiology, that kind of stuff, performance, behaviors within movement, all these areas really. So that was I didn't wake up one day and think today I'm going to look at so and so. It just, again, it was a very organic process for me in some ways to look at this. And as you advance, as I kind of go through, say, school into university and golf and whatnot, and as we get exposed to more, there's so much more we have accessible now, things like your podcast, for example. There's so much more information available. And I'm still now even more intrigued, and I'm more excited. I'm actually going for a phase at the moment, being hugely enthused around all these areas we can look at around, performance in plays and movement in how we learn. And I've got this great belief there is a kind of what next and a good way out there. I wake up most days, Toby, that you know what, today's going to be a good day, and I have that. Just maybe my personality, and I've always had that. I wake up today thinking it's going to be a good day today, and there's something, we're going to find the answer, for example. I don't know what the answer is, but we're going to find it. And I'm just going through a phase now, maybe if I look at, say, even my own systems, things have been updated quite a lot recently, things you kind of read and explore and spend time kind of very quietly reflecting on. So I do a lot of that. When I drive home, my commute home some days, because of where my studio is, can be, an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. So I like that. I get that quiet time just to very quickly kind of decompress and think about, was that the right approach today? Did I deliver it in the right way? Was the player happy? Are they clear? So I've always had that kind of slightly reflective personality as well. So that's kind of really my background. Just really been mildly, I don't want to say obsessed, but there's all things movement, performance, anatomy, physiology, all that stuff. And golf has been, when I look back, I played a lot of sports as a kid, football, for soccer, for those maybe in Australia, for you guys, was my first love. And I kind of really fell out of love with football very quickly. I had a very quick decline away from football. Pretty much at the same time I found golf. Golf to me was almost what kind of pushed me over the edge, my dislike for playing football at the time. And so kind of golf came at the right time. I was 13, I'm 50 now, so 37 years ago. And I was to combine all those areas, which beyond blessed, beyond fortunate. I even spoke at a conference in the US a few years ago, and it was lost on the audience, unfortunately, so I apologize to those guys. I said, I'm probably the biggest overachiever in life. if you look at kind of where I've come from and my background and that stuff, to be here with you guys today, it's a real overachievement. And it was lost, unfortunately. I think they lost the context behind that, but there you go.
Yeah. Tell me, so you're a UK PGA member. What other, PhDs, obviously you go by Dr. Mark Bull. If you had to write in your LinkedIn bio, what would that look like?
People just call me Bully, really, Toby. So, they've compressed all those into, Bully. That's the players and the coaches. Not as in I'm a bully, but just my last name. And so I got quite informal, which is great in some ways. Do you know, I even get confused myself that when you do presentations, I've been in, as you and I record this, I've been in Austria this week with a wonderful group of people in Austria. And they say, how do you want us to present you or introduce you for some reason? And I get kind of lost. So really, human movement, human performance is what I do. I look at, for example, we have a very dear mutual friend in Hugh Marr. So Hugh and I have been friends for many, many years. So let's say you use as an example, Hugh will bring his players to kind of really establish kind of why they do what they do. There might be movements that Hugh's trying to resolve. There might be areas that the players are going to improve and explore. And it could be around performance, could be around pain, for example. So really my role is to look at why people do what they do. Is it more anatomically how they're moving, physiologically what the system's working, environmentally what's happening around them, for example, more their concepts, their perceptions of movement, for example, and that's certainly the case in many players' case, Toby, that what we're trying to do is actually what creates the issue. So a lot of players that I see, and again, this is all meant in a fun way, it's not meant in an abrasive way in any way, that invariably, and it applies to me, what we're all trying to do is invariably what creates the issue. So I spend a lot of time around why people see it that way and why people are trying to produce X. So what you look at with the movement is that very few movement issues are actually ever movement issues. Almost everything will display as a movement problem. I have an issue with the club moving this way. I have certain, say, ground reaction force profiles that are maybe not advantageous. My wrist is sore, for example. Rarely is the movement the issue. There's something somewhere on a much kind of hierarchical level which is making that player move that way. So in many ways, for those that are very visual looking at this, to get good at that, we got to get good at this stuff. What you and I see are the fallout from things way in advance of that. So I had a player recently with a European Tour player just fractured the hamate bone in his hand. So the hooker hamate on his hand there was fractured, but it went down to a shoe design issue. So it was only through looking at the footwear he was wearing to play in, really constrained the foot from both feet actually from moving the way that they like to move to let the spine produce rotation. So no amount of, say, physiotherapy rehab or the orthopedic approach around looking at the wrist, that kind of stuff, never really resolved the wrist. It was only when we looked at his footwear, how that then influences what his feet could do, how the feet then connect into how the spine produces rotation. So therefore, what the shoes were preventing the foot from doing then influenced how the spine moved, which then adapted how the wrists move, which then causes his issue through impact. So that would be an example.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, into the trainers. So, looking at training, you and I spoke a little bit about training before we came on today. Looking around, say, for example, just do a bit less of this, a bit more of that to kind of give the guys the training. So just really that, movement, performance. Yeah, but it's all been compressed into 37 years down to one word, buddy. People just call me Bully now, so I get used to it.
I actually talk about shoes. I told a guy today to not send me any more swings with him in joggers because he just could not move the right way. His heel was so high.
Yeah.
And I guess when I hear a lot of the things that you're talking and kind of the journey you're kind of taking yourself down, and something that kept kind of triggering in my head was like, you hear the term thrown around a lot, the root cause of something. So someone will say like, we're getting this reaction in the golf swing, and someone will say the root cause is this. It seems to me like you take that, I'm going to use the term literally here, right? And you really do find the root cause. Like you go as far and you don't leave any stone unturned, whereas a typical golf coach obviously is not taking this deep dive as you are and who are using you as a resource. Like for instance, there you brought up a fracture in the hand and brought it back to footwear. Like, that's incredible. That must really, when you're assessing something like that and you're working through that type of, I'm going to use the term project or case study, does that stuff really fire you up and get you excited, Mark, when someone comes to you like that?
Oh, massive. Even you mentioned a root there, so apologies for the guys watching. I had a tooth removed recently. I had a root canal done a little while ago, which caused foot pain. So I started to experience really bad foot pain through a root canal procedure. So I actually had the tooth removed back in September, and hopefully the sacromian implant will go in soon. Anyway, so yes, I mean it's so exciting because if someone comes, I think about the guy coming in an hour as you and I record this today, and I mean it's such fun because you never know. I mean everyone has their story, which is so exciting. I really get excited by the story of the player, really. That so they come in looking at X, and to really establish why they do this. Now, it's not always that root canal and footwear, and that's some pretty extreme examples. There sometimes it is just down to shifting their perception slightly, looking at why they do what they do. Well, I get what you see here just connects back to stuff over there, but you get some stories some days where it's a very mad. I mean, it's such an esoteric approach, but in such a fun way that, and they get equally, I think, poured into the energy sometimes. So this is quite really, and it is mad. But when you give information to anybody, Toby, it invariably evokes a memory. So whether it be an image, a sound, think of smell, which you make these associations in England. The grass has been cut recently. It kind of, summer, that kind of stuff as you and I record this. So anytime you receive information, it evokes a memory. And you get guys go, yeah, really, that was the day that, when I last had that approach, I won the club championship, or I won an open championship, or I remember that's when I look at my pain, that's when I really started to get pain, 20 years ago, for example, when that happened. So it's mad how quickly when you share any kind of feedback, it can evoke some really powerful memories in players, both helpful and also unhelpful.
All right. We're going to talk about some topic areas, right?
So apologies to jump in there, Toby. Sorry, Toby. Apologies. I know there's a slight latency on the recording, so apologies for the viewers. There's a slight time delay. I kind of ask guys, when was the last time you felt good? When was the last time you moved well? And when was the last time you performed well? And I ask that as 3 questions every session. When did you really, it's Toby now, when did you really, do you know what, Toby, life's good. I just feel good today. And when did you really move well? When did you last perform well? And you get some great. Mine went back to this root canal treatment. That day changed most things. I mean, you look at our acupuncture meridians, they all connect into teeth. So every tooth is paired with an organ in the body, the liver, the spleen, that kind of stuff. So a lot of guys get then issues in these other areas when there's been a disruption within those acupuncture meridians of the teeth. So it's not always that extreme, but I go back to, I last felt really good. I last moved well and I said it good the day before my root canal. So that's when you start to then, wow, this is what we need to explore. Now, for most people, that's 1%. For 90 whatever plus % of people, it's not normally something, let's adjust how you stand and look at, for example, what you're trying to achieve, and that in itself resolves most issues.
Yeah. I will talk to that after, actually. All right. That's fantastic. I think you're really starting to really lay a really cool foundation down. I think people are really, you've got people hanging. I'm going to ask you these questions, all right, Mark? Before we go into the topic areas that we discussed that we're going to talk about, I'd like you just to kind of simply answer for me, if you can, in a couple of sentences, these 4 things I'm going to ask you. What, in Mark Bull's terminology, what does biomechanics mean? Or anyone's terminology.
Oh, that's a problematic word for me. I think modern day biomechanics has invaded the nervous system of the human. I think you look at how biomechanics is used in some areas, it's hugely invaded our ability to explore, be truly intuitive, truly organic. It's another layer of disruption. It will be almost invade. Look at kids. They go from being in the playground doctors to astronauts to pilots to whatever, and they're playing always. In some ways, that the kind of the creation lays within the dream in many ways. So these guys in play, my daughter's 5, she's in the playground, hopefully even now as we speak. They're playing all these different roles in life, and that's where the dream starts to it gets created. I think the use, not always, I mean, there's some people who use it very well, but I think when you look at, say, biomechanics, I know you've asked for 2 sentences, but this is a very tough one for me. That's okay. I think that the use of biomechanics in recent times has really invaded our ability to our own nervous system. So for me, biomechanics is the mechanical study of human movement, which is really what it is. That creates a lot of conflict for me, because when we go back to, again, very few movement issues are actually movement issues. Everything displays as a movement problem, but rarely is the movement the problem. There's something somewhere. Examples being, I say to most guys that we should playfully call ground reaction force hand reaction force, because the feet always follow the hands in life. The hands are how the brain and body communicate, hand and eye coordination, all that kind of stuff. How our hands move through space is why our feet often then move the way they do. So if you said to me, Mark, can you go and pick up the device behind me? I'd reach with my hand. My feet would follow and produce a pressure on the floor for my hand to move through space to grab the object. So I think you look at what the hands do, invariably neurologically control what the feet do. So for example, if there's a ground reaction force profile, invariably it can often be a hand movement, how we're trying to move the hands through space, then create those profiles through the floor. That's a long 2 sentences. Well, sorry, Toby. So I'll let you edit that.
I like it. I do like it. And so you talk about the hands there, are leading. That's an interesting. That's very, very interesting. I haven't. I obviously understand the, how they're related in their movements, but I didn't know so much that it was leading in that way. That you're kind of like you're saying, the hand goes first and the feet come after. That's an interesting way, kind of. Yeah,
even if you're happy doing this, sorry, Toby, if you're happy even doing this, sit down. Just with your hand, reach to the ceiling for me.
Yep.
So your spine will extend. Put your hand on the floor. Your spine, so touch the floor for me as best you can. Your spine will flex. With your left hand, reach out to the right for me to grab something. So with your left hand, reach across to the right. You'll rotate. So your spine is always following your hand. So typically, spine issues within movement are invariably hand issues. How the hand is moving, the spine will follow.
That's... You've blown my mind. All right, let's talk to the next topic area. I love that. I love that a lot. All right, let's stay there. Let's stay there, right, with the hands there. Now, if we were talking about certain types of patterns within a golf swing, right, and we see someone like a Scotty Scheffler who's got extremely high hands, and then he's got, a real amount of extension to his, his upper spine, the top of his backswing. He's like centered. I think he's like 0, isn't he, at the top? Are you telling me that his spine is moving that way because his hands are moving up high, not the other way around?
Yeah, it's hard. Scheffler I have no experience of, so it's a hard one to give accurate feedback on him. But typically, where the hands move through space, the spine will follow. That's why I kind of say that the hands are how the brain and body communicate. The spine issues are invariably more hand issues. So you kind of look at it with someone like him. This is a slightly kind of hypothetical approach. If you look to say improve what his ribcage does, let's see how the hands respond. But if you look to improve his hands, let's see how the spine responds. And I would, again, I say this with no experience and completely cold. I would be, if we look to, again, if this was his question and there was a very, very valid reason as to why, there's a very clear objectives, So if there was a reason why we had to do this with someone like him, I would be, let's look at what the hands do. I think the ribcage will respond to the hands better than vice versa. So again, and a lot of that is always that trade between evidence and experience. I know many guys with good evidence, but no experience of players, and vice versa. So a lot of guys with great experience, but no evidence. When you kind of combine those two, typically in my experience is that the evidence that I have is that invariably when you look at, say, hand and wrist movement, the spine normally responds quite nicely. But if I'm trying to adjust what the spine does, it doesn't always migrate into what the hands and wrists do.
Interesting. It's interesting. All right. Can you explain to us what the term anatomy means?
Anatomy.
Anatomy. Yeah.
It's just the human body is my understanding. So it's our human body.
All right. And last one here.
Did I get that one right, Toby? Do I get a tick for that?
we're going to be using these types of words in our next conversations, right? So I'm kind of just helping some people out a little bit here in regards to some of the stuff there. So neurological learning, what does this mean?
In the most playful sense, really, how we create these concepts and perceptions within our nervous system, really. So it's really how the brain and nervous system kind of communicate to produce movement. We actually look at that. The word perception possibly is not the most accurate word. I mean, so you look at, say, there's something called forward planning within movement. The brain is always trying to look and, it's always trying to figure out kind of where and what next. So that goes back to a survival mechanism we have. The part of our brain called the amygdala, which is our like smoke detector in some ways, which has evolved through millions of years of evolution. We're always trying to figure out where and what next. So the brain is always doing way before it does. So when you look at, say, movement, there's a very defined sequence to how we move. So it's something called anticipation, sensory feedback, conclusion, expression. It's the kind of cycle we go through. So movement is done invariably through anticipation. We anticipate kind of where and what next. How do you get here from there, from over there? That's an anticipation. So I'll often say to players, if you're trying to get here, how can you get there from here? Show me how you need to move from here to there to make that movement happen. So you're trying to create anticipation. Or if you're trying to move that way in transition, show me how you think the best way is to move through backswing to allow that transition to happen. So it's a very kind of intuitive, very implicit way, very organic way again. You're trying to create anticipation that, okay, if I need to do that from there, maybe that's the best way to move. So you anticipate, which is what movement is. It's done through anticipation. Once we anticipate, that then creates a sensory piece of feedback. Invariably in golf, it's vision or feel. So it goes back again to the brain's real estate. Over half of our brain has been allocated to movement and vision. So therefore, kind of our evolution tells the story. We are very visual movers. Why? Because half the brain is really allocated to vision and movement. So we get this piece of feedback. Typically in golf, it looks like, it feels like, the very typical golf responses. We then create often what are called perceptions. They're more conclusions. So therefore, based on what I anticipate and based on what it means to me, I've concluded this is the way I need to move. And it then creates an expression, which is what we see. So as I've moved my hands around now, that's the fallout from I've anticipated, I've got a piece of feedback, I've concluded, concept perception is often referred to, I express. So it really comes into me then what we mean by training. For me, we need to train less the expression, more so the anticipation. Too many people train movement, but we need to train the anticipation. Show me how you could move. If you're trying to get here from here, show me how you could move. And that's really going into then those deeper systems of the organic learner. What does it mean to me? There's a wonderful phrase by a guy called Norman Doidge in a book that says, would you eat someone else's pre-digested food? And that's invariably what coaching can be. You're eating someone else's pre-digested food. You're trying to make sense of someone else's meaning of the planet. They've taken all the mineral wealth, the nutrient density. You've got left with, the poo, literally. Which is what you're left with. So I kind of said that to most guys, you wouldn't eat someone else's pre-digested food. Therefore, you have to create your own experience of moving that way. That's truly authentic learning. So for me, golf coach, the needle's gone too much towards, we've got very movement aware. We've got very expressive in our coaching. We've got to shift the needle this way to be more sensory aware and more anticipatory in some ways. Show me how you could do this. So an example, and I do this a lot with players. Now, if you're trying, again, it works more so with, more established players or players with good awareness. They have to be established. That often the most realistic way of improving someone's backswing giving them a very, very different concept of transition, and vice versa. If you're trying to improve someone's downswing, give them a different concept of backswing. So they have to anticipate then the idea of forward planning. Okay, so if I'm trying to do that, then maybe I need to do this. That's true learning rather than, hey, Toby, we got to get whatever, for example. That's the invasive nervous system. You've taken, and I say this to most guys, who owns the learning, you or the player? They must be in charge of their learning. They must, for sure, we guide them and we hold their hands and we encourage them, but they have to own their own learning. And invariably, too often within coaching, the learning is taken away. So they get removed from the learning. So when it goes wrong on the first tee, they have no ability to problem solve anymore, which is a whole different discussion.
Yes, that is a whole other discussion there. Interesting, because in some of my coaching, Mark, for instance, if I'm trying to, just shift a number on the GC quad, so I'm trying to push someone to, path more right, I'll often talk about a post-impact feel or a position or a finish that I kind of want them to be in, and get a reaction through the golf swing by giving someone, you're using that term anticipation a lot there, by giving them a desired outcome of where I want them to be, I'm getting a whole shift in the sequence beforehand. Is that something that you're kind of talking about here as well? Like, for instance, you're not talking about like a coach might say to a student, I want you to look like this at P5. You're showing the student on how to move into that position to get to there or something. Is that what you're kind of saying? Yeah,
you look at it in many ways, at the end defines the start. So you look at most systems in life, let's say like a navigational system, GPS, sat nav, call it what you want, depending on what part of the world you're on. You put end coordinates in, so that the map becomes, how do you get there from here? It's all based around the end. So almost every 100-meter sprint, it's how do you get to the end as fast as you can. You look at, say, training, how do we get to end range of training? The end defines the start in many ways. So unless you, for me, very clear around how you're trying to end and finish, it then makes it very challenging to figure out how you wish to start. So I spend a lot of time around post-impact, finish, club movement, post-impact, for example. And that can be really powerful in shifting their understanding of, or certainly their intention then of, okay, so if I'm trying to finish over here more, then perhaps it's actually more advisable standing here to start with. So the end defines the start. It doesn't always work vice versa. A lot of guys will adjust their start position without really understanding how it influences impact. So in some ways, I think golf coaching is almost encouraged the wrong way around. We almost need to start with the environment. What environment are we actually moving through? The airspace, for example. Just say the 10th of Augusta, for example, big kind of dog leg down to the left. What's the ball trying to do? Yep. Okay, it needs to kind of move through the airspace this way. So therefore, how can we best deliver the club to produce that? To move the club that way through impact? How do we probably need to move in transition? To move that way in transition, maybe what's the best way to move through backswing? To move that way in backswing, how do we hold and stand? That would be an example of anticipation. And in the end defines the start. Invariably, I'll go back to my first, lesson is, it's an explicit form. You could argue I was also learning golf, watching my mates play and hitting balls through windows. I used to terribly, so I own up to my crime now. Me and my mates used to hit golf balls through the school classroom windows as kids. And they never did find out who broke all those windows in the physics lab on a Monday morning. We used to sit there very quiet like this and go. But if they knew what we were doing yesterday, we used to aim balls through the windows. And anyway, and that's an example where when I went for my first lesson, I was taught to hold the club. I had no idea. I was like, how on earth do you hit a golf ball like this? Retrospectively now, when you look at it, if we're looking at how the club moves and what the ball's trying to do, I now see why I need to do that. So I think golf coaching is maybe taught the wrong way around.
It's interesting. It's a great example that you use for the 10th there at Augusta too, because a lot of people were familiar with that hole. You see a lot of people taking fairway metal off that tee and they've got to turn it, in a right to left fashion. And I remember when I used to watch golf even as a kid, and my father, I was always looking at golf swings, right? I always looked at golf differently than anyone from a young age. And I could tell my father the shot that was happening, that the player was trying to hit by the finish position. And Dad used to go to me all the time, like, how the hell do you know that? I'm like, well, you can just tell his intentions, right? You can see what he was trying to do. And that's me. I've never really thought too much into that, but that was from a very, very, very young age watching them hit the shot, right? Because then I could predict where it was going to be. I'd tell Dad where the shot's going to finish. Anyways, not, to the degree as a child watching on a really old school TV at the time. But when you talk about the 10th there, right, and you see the player moving a ball from right to left there at Augusta, and I try to explain to people that it's not just when you see Tiger get there and Tiger's already he's making all these shifts in what he's trying to get done, his intentions before the shot. It's not just one or singular thing that's different. It's everything that's different. It's what I try to say to people on how he's trying to move it in that way. Like, he's not looking at it from I need to hit this position, or I need to flex this, or I need to, do this. He's feeling the shot on how he's going to be moving a little bit more to kind of, push the swing direction a little bit more to the right, close the face a little bit more down. And you can definitely see that when he stands up to that tee box, that how can I get this around the corner? And he's feeling the shot before he's actually thinking about the shot. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah. I mean, he's almost becoming the shot. It's like the old kind of Bruce Lee phrase. I mean, become water. In some ways, you become the ball flight within golf. And that's what he's trying to connect with. How do I move to produce that flight? And so it always starts with understanding the demands of the task. What does the task demand from the human or the ball flight? Once we understand that, then we start to compute then. So that to produce that, maybe I need to move this way. So I think a lot of guys, they got to reconnect. Again, as science evolves, it's mad to think this, though, but the more science evolves, the more it reconnects us to nature, which is ridiculous. We need science now to prove nature's good for us, which is even more outrageous. But Tiger's just connecting with nature there. How do I kind of move the ball? How do I he's really connecting with then what that the environment demands from him. And, intuitively he knew that. I say knew in a fun way. I'm not saying the Tiger's finished now, but in his dominant years, he kind of knew that, like most of these players do. Scheffler would be a good example now. Just kind of knows how to move, and he kind of moved away from that. It's interesting as well because quite disappointing in some areas.
Yeah, and I remember, I'm going to say 10 years ago, I was giving a golf lesson to a guy, and I was trying to get him to shift, and I was just hammering my head against the wall. I was young. I was probably making the mistakes a little bit. And 5 minutes to go before the lesson finishes, he goes, he was hitting big hooks, right? Big hooks. And he said to me, do you want me to try and fade it? I said, yeah, that'd be nice. And he goes, bang, 3 in a row, dead straight trying to fade. So, and that kind of triggered in my brain when you're talking there right now. Every time I give a golf lesson to someone, and I just tell people that someone says I'm hooking it, I teach them how to slice it. People who slice it, I'm teaching them how to hook it. I know that's very vague. So if I ever have a person who comes to me, particularly I think, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but people who move the ball excessively right to left for the right-handed golfer, generally I say to people, you can move it excessively that way and still play quite good golf. And you can be excessively in the other direction, you can be a really, really high handicapper. So when I'm dealing with someone who is moving in a fashion of curving the ball too far right to left for the right-handed golfer, I'll say, can you show me how they hit a fade? That's the first question I'll ask every single time. Or, after I work out their ball flight goals. And a lot of the time, Mark, I'll tell the person, and they'll hit a good shot. They might hit 5 or 6 in a row, and it proves that that's the right feel they need to do, because they know what's needed to happen, right? So they've shifted a multitude of things instinctively to do it. And then they'll say to me, but that feels like I'm cutting it, Mark. That feels like I'm slicing it. I go, yeah, but you're not slicing it. You're actually getting a desired ball flight that you want. And when you're talking there about the learning and stuff like that, is that some of the type of simple conversations that you're having with students on a day-to-day basis? Or, how would you go about that if someone came to you who was moving the ball excessively right to left and wanted to straighten it out?
I mean, absolutely. You look at it, some really powerful stuff in there, Toby, that typically our reference system is always day one. So our day one experiences become our reference for life. So often, even 5, 10, 15, 20 years on, you're still referencing our day one exposures. They're called long-held beliefs, which we all have a belief which we refuse to let go of. Australia may win the Ashes one day. Who knows? Again, Toby, look, we have these belief systems that we just do not let go of, or maybe England in this case. And so that becomes our reference system. So often guys that are slicers are on day one hookers and vice versa. They spend the rest of their life avoiding becoming day one again. So you actually look at what human movement is. It goes back to one of your earlier questions. The basis of movement is become more, become less. That is the basis of what we do in life. Do you know what, Toby? Do a bit less of this, a bit more of that. That is the basis of movement. So when I look at, as you mentioned, if someone came to me for a session, so the person I've got coming today next, it will be based around that. Hey, Mike, his name's Mike. Hey, Mike, do a bit less of this, do a bit more of that. That is, this is ridiculous to even suggest on any level the right approach because it's such a complex question across multiple areas. So apologies for the listeners listening to this, but it's something like weight loss. Do you know what? Just, eat less, do more. Now, I say that with an outrageous response in my head because there's thousands of things which influence weight gain, but it's a bit like that. Just eat a bit less, do a bit more. That's the basis of movement. And that invariably is kind of what you said there. So when I look at I mean this in the most humble way. So I hope that the listeners view it this way. If I think when I started presenting, maybe 20 years ago now, it was ego. Ego gets in the way, and I would tell everyone what I knew that day. It was like, look at me, I know this stuff, and it was complete ego. And you get to a stage and you recognise that, and you get to a point, go, do you know what? Just do this. Why? Because it works in a very humble way. Just do that, Toby, right? It's good for you. And that's where the idea like become more, become less is really evolved from. You look at players and you go, well, just do a bit less of that and a bit more of this, and that's your whatever it might be. So that's a big one for me. That it's unusual. That approach in some format doesn't display in every session that I do.
I love that. That's really good. Hey, can we talk a little bit about 3D and what do you use, and in your 3D, say your coaching day, how often are you using it?
So obviously I have my own system. I developed my own 3D system. So I have my own kind of my own software system, as you may know. Every single session I haven't not used my system now for probably close to 20 years in every session. So I wouldn't. I'd feel extremely naked and exposed in a fun way if you said, "Mark, kind of fly manually for a session." I'd be embarrassed to charge someone. I think would be the answer for that. And so I have my own system. Obviously, Bull3D, as you know. And what's been great about that is I can develop it really based around then my experiences and exposures of players. That you'll get players and you'll get coaches like Hugh. You'll get the physios and the trainers. Like, it'd be cool. We could look at this. So I've been very lucky that the system is always advancing and developing because of the interaction you get with players. So I think that's really cool. That'd be nice if we could then look at X because that's clearly becoming an influence on what people do. So I've just added lots of things in lately. Into the system, things like the 3D flat slot's just been added. The interaction with the force plate. I look at a lot of variability of movement as to, okay, if we adjust the pelvis, how can that then predict what the hand path might do? So we kind of know in advance there's no value in adjusting what the pelvis does because that could be very disruptive for you, say, for example, on hand and club paths. So it's a lot of fun. Again, the system's always developing as you work with the players in the teams around them.
And tell me, how many markers have you got, and what are you kind of looking at? What are some main key ones you're looking at? For instance, say you have a tournament player come in, like a PGA Tour player. And I know there's probably, obviously every case study is completely different and each individual's needs are different and why the coach has actually brought their player in towards you. But what are some real, I guess, big ones that you're looking at that maybe people are neglecting, or which ones?
I'll probably look at segmentally. So within the way I devise my system, you can move between systems. I have these performance markers that I look at that typically will display in most players, regardless of their coaching beliefs, their movement history, the environment, their background, for example. So even their frame shape, they're called helixes, which is the shape of the human frame. Whether you've got a certain shaped skeletal system. So all these things around us we can look at. There's still movements that most players make regardless. So I look at those. But if you want to look at it more, say, kinematically around, say, that the segment data, I kind of look a lot at what the pelvis, the head, and the hands do. You can look at that in many ways. And the reason why the evolution or the basis of movement in life is how the hands and eyes coordinate to move the pelvis. I didn't design the human. Don't shout at me. I didn't make it that way. But that's how the human is. That's how we've evolved to move. How the hands and eyes coordinate to best move the pelvis through space. That's the basis of human movement in life. So I look a lot at what the head does. The head, it's not vision, but it's the segment closest connected to vision. A lot of what the pelvis does and how the hands move. So a lot of how those three segments are interacting. The pelvis moves this way, the head moves that way, and the hands move that way. Okay, that lovely interaction of those three. So invariably I look at that. How the pelvis moves. It's the segment closely connected to our center of mass, crudely speaking. It's not the center of mass, but it's the one closest connected to it. Hand and eye coordination is life. So when we start to combine and connect those three, then that's the ones I would look at in most sessions.
I have seen some people I'm going to use the term offender, but don't like using generalization of, grouping a segment of everyone, like everyone does this, or when we collect 100 PGA Tour players, they all do this, because I'm assuming that, a lot of them all move differently, right? But if we're talking about the pattern or the movement of a pelvis, for the listeners out there, how much lateral movement, I'm going to use that term, average, are you seeing of a PGA Tour player? How far is their pelvis moving in space?
In downswing or backswing or laterally?
All of it.
A lot of it is dependent on with what club, and again, this is often where it gets lost. They look at, say, a club in an environment with a player, and then create a belief system based on one club and one environment and one player. Different clubs produce very different profiles. So typically, the longer the club, the more you will see that kind of lateral move of that pelvis in backswing. Then it goes into, say, some coaching philosophies. There's philosophies out there that are actively encouraging the pelvis to go left. And so, as in for the right-handed player, sorry, backswing. But those players are still very successful. They win. They're not in pain, which is obviously a huge area for me that I look at with players in terms of pain avoidance. So there's always that. A lot of that approach is often the context is removed, the individual is removed, and invariably what they're trying to sell is their belief system. If we look at the motivation behind these approaches, is normally it's a financial one, or there's a belief, I'm trying to sell you something now. That's the real, if you look at it for what it really is, therefore you have to do this. If you don't do that. So what people typically sell, Toby, is fear. So fear is behind every movement. If I don't move this way, I might lose distance. If I don't do this, I might be perceived as being not very good. If I did that on the first team, my mates might laugh at me. If I move that way, it may hurt. So fear drives these movements. So a lot of these approaches that you see are driven both by financial aspirations and fear. You need to do this, and I'll tell you the reason why, which is simply not true, because I can give you, every guy does that. I'll give you a guy who does this, who's won a major championship, who's never been in pain, who's clearly autonomous in what he does, wonderful ball striker, clearly owns what he does, and he doesn't do that. So that's always the caveat. You have to look at it with that. But when you look at it, say, generalizations get dismissed. They're generalizations for a reason, that many people do them. And, the idea of kind of generic thinking gets dismissed by some, but it's there for a reason, because it happens frequently. So you do need to look at that. If it's reoccurring, it's valuable because lots of people do it. But yeah, typically, in more advanced guys, you'll see that pelvis kind of glide and rotate. And then there's tremendous lateral rotation that displays in the downswing phase. And it's one of lateral rotation. The pelvis is moving laterally in centimeters, way into the kind of mid-teens, in inches, kind of 6-7 inches. You'll see a lateral shift in that pelvis in downswing relative to its start position. There's obviously the elevation that moves up as well through impact in response to some of the ground reaction forces. It goes back away from the ball, again in response to some of the ground reaction forces and also how the hands are moving. So the pelvis, I mean, again, it's one of those, this is my generic feedback now. If you're going to get one segment to move well, make it be the pelvis. Why? For many reasons. It's closely connected to our center. It's the most, within human biology, our gut is our second brain. There's a lot of research now around things like the microbiome, the gut-brain connection, the vagus nerve, which is what connects the gut in the brain. But within movement, our second brain is our pelvis. So most adaptations migrate and display in the pelvis. So our pelvis is our second brain of movement. When the pelvis moves well, again, define well, fine, get it, one of those, I appreciate that. When the pelvis moves well, the human moves well. When the pelvis is very adapted, so even Scheffler, crudely speaking, moves his pelvis very well. If you compare it to more his peers and his contemporaries, for sure there's adjustments, as there is with every player. But for the, this is what people like to do a lot, Toby. They like to separate. It's what we do in life. I like to see what connects people rather than what separates us. And it's a bit of a modern day theme that we like to demonize and polarize and separate because it sells whatever. Again, it's a very powerful sell with that. I look at in players what connects all these people. And if you looked at, say, Scheffler's pelvis, again, I have no experience of what he's ever done, certainly live. It'd be very comparable to many other players that are somewhat more aligned with, say, conventional thinking. So they look at the things which are different, as feet, as hands, but they never talk about what he does similar to the other players, which is, you smile. It's just the way people's at, again, because they like to demonize things.
Yes. Oh no, yes, I completely agree. And I remember, when he started playing so well, and I was like, I got to work out what this guy's doing so well. It's the first thing I thought to myself, I've got to stop sleeping on this guy and download his golf swings and really, really learn what this guy's doing really, really well. And what do they say? That the pelvis it's like the compass nearly, right? Kind of leading. Now, can you tell me about, in regards to kind of stay in that subject area around the pelvis, right? When you see the pelvis moving from into, say, the downswing sequence, right? So it's moved a little bit, off the ball generally, use the term general, right? And then you see it starting to move back towards the target, right? Are you seeing that first movement back towards the target with the pelvis still staying slightly closed in a lateral sense, or is it opening up straight away? What are you generally seeing with that movement?
Yeah, it's kind of lateral rotation, so it's gliding laterally as it starts to rotate back towards the target. I've never seen a pelvis move completely lateral without rotation. Might be only a couple of degrees, but it is still rotating.
Is it still closing? Sorry, is it still closing?
But that then comes back
glide?
to how someone defines top of backswing. A lot of it then comes back to the systems. If you're using certain systems, so in my system, top of backswing defined by when the pelvis reaches, loosely speaking, maximum rotation. So, for example, the rib cage and the hands and arms and club is still moving into their backswing phase. That's what I would define then transition when it's the last segment that's moved into downswing. So a lot of it comes way often these confusions often occurs because people are using different systems to define what are called critical events: address, top, impact, finish. In my system, I've really even in the most advanced players, ever seen a pelvis completely be held in its rotation backswing value and move laterally. It's still starting to rotate as it glides. Now, there may be a dominance in one direction at that moment in time, but it's still moving in the other directions.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought there, but I love, yes, when you talk about the backswing to downswing thing, and I try to tell some of my students, I like to even take that, because I think what it does is it takes out the movement and creates these two individual segments when and creates like nearly, the old adage where you might see someone say, you swing to the top and you get to the right side, then you stop, then you kind of go to the left side. Like they've forgotten that shift is kind of happening beforehand and getting rid of the movement. But a term I like to use a little bit with some of the players, not too sure if you use it as well, but I use like a loading phase and an unloading phase. So I might use that to when they've there's a little bit of the drop, and then that's when we're kind of finishing, if that makes sense, the top of the backswing there, not just like when the club gets to parallel or wherever we're kind of measuring. I like to try and use that type of, even though it's like a up, load, and then that's it. And then from there, it's the unloading phase. But I know what you mean. I think the terminology backswing and downswing
goes
is definitely...
back to...
You go.
Sorry, there's a slight delay. Apologies, Toby, for jumping ahead of you there. Unloading or unweighting is really breath. So breathing, it's our most hierarchical process. Breathing, when we breathe in, our COG comes up. When we exhale, our COG goes down. So we actually, density goes up and down with breath. So the idea of unweighted and loading are just derivatives of breath. If you look at, again, the hierarchical system, when people breathe well, they move well. And when people breathe poorly, they move poorly. So again, the idea, a lot of movement issues are actually breath issues.
Yes, I love that. You know what? I was actually in the physio during the week, and I knew I was in good company when I went and saw this lady. I got recommended to her, and she asked me straight away how my breathing was. And I said, yes, you're my girl. Good job. Like, I'm in good company here. You know what I mean? It was the first question she asked. So definitely understand
our
that.
Our two best medications are breath and walking, nearly.
Yes. Now, I've got one more question for you, so I'm going to let you go and meet with your next student, right? And Hugh actually told me to ask this to you, right? He said, what advice can you give? It's not a nasty, it's nothing tricky or anything like that at all, right? It's very above board. But he said to me, what have you learned, or what can a coach do who doesn't have access to your technology or, using 3D each day? What would you encourage a coach on how can they kind of go about it without using 3D?
I think it really goes back to what we just said. Just kind of slow down and breathe. Press pause. Just kind of take your time. I mean, the slower you go, the quicker you get there. Very few good things happen when you go fast. And and just kind of look at, I wonder why they do this. Goes back to, we almost kind of bookend our discussion today from the first question you asked me, how did I get into this? It goes back to me as a probably slightly annoying pain in the ass 10-year-old. I'd be, why dad? It's like, why'd you ask why? That kind of question. And just look at, I wonder why they're doing this. And just take your time to explore it. I can only give you my experiences. At least I hope so. So if anybody has had a session from me, has listened to this, I really please hope you see it that way. I like to take my time with people to really understand why they do it. So it may take X amount of balls longer. It may take a few minutes. It might take a phase of just quietness where I might say to someone, just give me a minute or so just to think about this. And most people are very grateful. And I hope it comes across the way it's meant to come across. It's just me trying to figure out in my own head, I wonder why they're doing this. So if you are a coach and it's, say it's you and I on a range somewhere, Toby, and it's just the two of us, just slow down, breathe out, probably press pause, and just kind of feel, I wonder why they're doing that. And from that, invariably, the answer hopefully starts to just appear. Most people go too quick, too soon, jump in too fast, and pull back. And that's just chaos. That's not coaching. You've got to look at what coaching is, and very few guys have a definition for. I have my own definitions of coaching. Coaching is just awareness training, awareness of thought, awareness of movement, awareness of breath, awareness of nutrition, awareness of physiology, all these areas. So really all you're ever trying to do, Toby, is influence someone's behaviours. And why that's so important is you look at our physiology, there's a very defined sequence to physiology. It goes behaviours, exercise, nutrition, supplementation, intervention. Again, that wasn't me that designed that. This is just how our physiology has evolved over thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years of evolution. Behaviours, exercise, nutrition, supplementation, medication. So it always starts with, what can I do? What's my involvement in the problem? How can I help? you can't out-train poor behaviours. You can't out-supplement poor movement, poor nutrition, sorry. So it doesn't matter what exercise you do and what nutrition you take, if you're still behaving that way, bad sleep, too much mobile phone use, especially late in the evening, doesn't matter what you take nutrition-wise, it's like putting water into a bucket with a hole in it. You can't out-supplement poor nutrition. They're called supplements, not replacements. You can never out-medicate bad behaviours, poor training, poor nutrition. But we've kind of inverted that in the West in particular. We go medication, supplementation, exercise, nutrition. You mean I have to do something? You mean I'm the problem? So I say to most guys, you look at what coaching is, it's really just behaviour training and awareness training. Slow down, take your time, there's no rush, and just look at it. And invariably then, the answer will hopefully just emerge. Do you know what? Yeah, it's that. And people, invariably we're always talking code, humans. If you listen very carefully, people give you the answer in code. A friend of mine, a guy called Rich Neal at home, is fantastic with this, Rich. He always says that people talk like in headlines. They give the headline, a huge catastrophe, and then beneath it they give the context.
Yeah.
Read the context. Oh, it's terrible today. Dreadful. Oh, man, it was such a bad round. I shot 68. Hold on a second. Too bad. But they catastrophize, and then they start to give... they breathe out, the rational human reconnects, and they give you the context. So don't read the headline. Look at what's beneath it. And that's why I ignore what they say. I look at what's beneath the headline and, okay.
I love that. Well, I think we spend a lot of our time, working out to someone what they define as shit. It always starts as, how'd you go? Shit. All right, let's dive into it deeper. Like you said, 68.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you even before you even look at anything technically, you can find out that they might have just lost 2 drives to the right. That's it. Okay, so we've got to fix why those 2 drives went to the right today, how did that happen? Yeah. Let's work through that. So, fine. I like that, catastrophizing, looking underneath the headline. That's fantastic. Mark, I'm going to let you go. I don't want you to be late for your student, and you're very, very thankful. I'm very, very thankful for your time. All listeners, I'm sure, will love this. They can all join Bull Academy. I'll put all the links below, and and put your Instagram stuff down below there. It's absolute gold there. It's absolute gold on Mark's Instagram account. It's fantastic, listeners. It's not the stupid, catchy stuff that you'll see that kind of gets people's attention, fear-mongering to make you watch it. It's actually good, solid information. So, Mark, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, mate. You've been great.
Toby, thank you so much, and appreciate the invitation. Anytime you want to catch up, only too glad to. So thank you once again.
Thanks, Mark. Cheers.